population, certainly they would have had people that had migraines, people that had vertigo, people that had depression, people that had insomnia, people that had multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, and so forth, that they did not see an increase in those diseases. Now, does that mean that any one individual person did not? No, they didn't study it at that level. They didn't report each and every individual. They looked at the population. So I guess I can't guarantee a yes to, it's a very broad question. If there's a specific disorder, I'd be happy to try to address that. But I have no reason to believe that at the levels that are being cited for the kinds of projects you will be talking about, that there should be any increase in any underlying health issue. And we know that from a population that won't be so, and I really don't have any expectation that an individual would suffer either.
All right, Clan, I'm not sure they were able to hear you earlier, so I'm passing it down to you. Whether you have wind turbines on your property or how far they are set back from your home or your property.
The closest one is, well, it's essentially 100 foot off the property line and about just a tad over a quarter mile south of my house. That's the closest one. And then there's another one on that same 120, and there's one across the road. They're all within the closest are all within about a half a mile radius of the house.
Okay. And I don't know, Chief, you live in the county where they probably we have more wind turbines than any other county except for maybe Huron and the Thumb. You gotta have neighbors and folks that you know that have turbines either on their property or next to it. What's just your experience, what people tell you about living next to turbines?
The only complaint I'm aware of, I have a copy of one of the county commissioners quite often, and a year ago up in the Breckenridge area, I had somebody that was complaining about some noise from them, from one of the turbines that was close to their property, or maybe not on their property, I don't know how that was resolved eventually. I think it was at certain times of the day, and they could go in with their computer and change when that turbine ran for certain wind speeds or whatever. But I live, pretty much in the center of Ithaca, about a block and a half from the fire hall, but pretty near geographically, right in the center. And the soybean plant I talked about that they built on the east side of town, there's a wind turbine across the road that's actually closer to my house than the soybean plant. And wind direction, that wind turbine's been there, one of the early ones. I never heard that, but with wind blowing in the right direction out here, the dryers blowing at the grain plant. I'll also hear their emergency alarms go out if they have a problem with the conveyor line. The alarm goes off, if the wind's in the right direction. So, in my personal experience in town, and with family living around the area, there's more noise from agricultural bean drying operations and so forth that I've heard than the actual wind turbine.
So beans are louder than wind turbines, I guess, is the takeaway there. All right, Ken, if the World Health Organization or other groups talk about 45 dBAs, why do they use that number? I'm just reading the question. 45, I get, is that kind of a standard, that's kind of a standard wind turbine, a noise level from the setback distance to a home or a property line or something? 45 dBA is what the question asks and mentions the World Health Organization.
So the World Health Organization uses 45 dBA in two contexts. One is the 1999 Community Noise Guidelines, where these 45 decibels average over a night, 8-hour average, measured outside the bedroom window as a sleep disturbance guideline. The other is specific to wind turbines, which is a different metric altogether. It's an annual average day, evening, night level, DNL. And that is weighted LEQ, weighted equivalent continuous level. They weight at 10 decibels at night, 5 decibels in the evening, and nothing during the day. Anyway, 45, that annual average is equivalent to about 44 decibels, 1 hour LC maximum. So they base that guideline on annoyance impacts.
Okay.
I forget what the criteria is. I think it might be 10% annoyance, 12%. I don't remember what the threshold is. Maybe got your own body knowledge.
Okay. Dr. Helen, heard about the Schellendecker family in the Consumers Energy Project had to move out of their house. He and his wife said their teeth were loose because of wind turbines. Do you know anything about that? And wind turbines cause someone to get sick like that?
No.
That's the whole answer.
I want to be clear. I know them personally because a profession. I interviewed them, examined them, both he and her. And I can assure you that what they were experiencing, in my opinion, had nothing to do with turbines whatsoever.
Okay.
So we can go into the details of that. I think there's some personal medical history I'd really rather not share in a public forum unless I have to, but there's some public information out there if you want to dig in a little bit to it. Can I say something about the WHO? And the last one?
Sure.
I think it's important to ask ourselves, is the WHO a credible source of information at all? There's no reason to be defensive about it. Here at 44, 45, those are slivers within each other. The most recent one in which they had that 45 L10 figure that they suggested was a reasonable starting point for regulation in their 2018 publication, which is their most recent one. It's one of the oddest reads I've ever seen in any regulatory or recommended scientific group in my entire career looking at this in almost 2 decades. There's a little footnote, and you gotta read the fine print of their long and relatively boring document, and these things are tedious. Like, there's a footnote in there that said, we didn't include the Health Canada studies whatsoever. There's like 6 or 8 publications on there. All the most rigorous, the most informative, most objective study on human health and turbines in the history of this topic. And their footnote, and that was published in 2016. This is a WHO document 2 years later saying that they didn't have time to incorporate or consider Health Canada for their opinion, and had they been even more generous with their level. So I'm not even sure that WHO has a relevant credible voice.
Okay, I have a question that I get to answer, because it's a political question, it's not a health or a safety question. What's that? Well, I don't know, you were long on taxes, buddy. The Green New Deal is a Democrat agenda. Why hasn't the governor been promoting wind turbines? I suppose she has, but she's been busy doing a lot of other things that maybe haven't made people as happy as they could. That's my political answer. Then there's a note that said, Ken, and I'm gonna link this, Ken, into another question. The note says, cars are designed to be less than 30 hertz. I guess that means like the wind noise coming off of your car or off the hood of your car or whatever, the grill or something. So I don't know if 30 hertz puts it in the infrasound category. And then the second question is, can you give an example of other things that produce infrasound and compare those to wind turbines' infrasound range? So a car, I don't know if 30 hertz is infrasound, and that's what comes off of the front of our car when we're driving, even at high speeds. So can you give us some comparisons of things that create infrasound or what those sounds are like? Because I'm clueless.
I've never heard this, the issue with 30 hertz in cars, but anyway, 30 hertz is not infrasound. Infrasound is 20 hertz and below. Nevertheless, there's a lot of things in the environment that create infrasound, primarily wind. wind probably generates the most infrasound, on most anything. Waves, ocean waves, the movement of waves generates quite a bit of infrasound. So, generally, if you're at the beach, there's more infrasound there than you typically get from wind turbines.
Okay.
Those are
Well, I'll ask this question, because somebody brought it up too. I'm embarrassed to say that, I put a new dishwasher in my house a couple of years ago when my old one died. And for 2 years, I never realized this until one day, I don't know why, I looked at the front of my dishwasher and it said, this is the silencer or whatever version, and it said 50 dBAs. So as I've heard conversations about wind turbines being limited to 45 dBAs, and then you had that slide that every 5 or 10 dBA difference would affect the degree of setback. So if you set a standard of 45 dBAs at whatever the property line or some distance of the setback, and my dishwasher is 50 dBAs in my kitchen, should I be worried about my dishwasher in my kitchen? And it's advertised as a low noise dishwasher. And so I took a picture, and I have it on my phone. The front of my dishwasher says 50 dBA. So what does that mean in relation to a 45 dBA setback of a wind turbine at, say, whatever, 500 feet or 1,000 feet or whatever? So dishwasher versus wind turbine.
Yeah, it's hard to make a comparison, because the dishwasher's in your house, the turbine's outside your house. And they're different, the sound is different, of course, and I wouldn't worry about the dishwasher anyway. It's not gonna fade here and damage or cause any health effects.
Okay. All right, well, I won't even mention my bathroom ceiling fan. Dr. Alagogan, what medical advice would you give your patients if they complain of stress from turbine noise or flicker or sleep disturbance?
You mean if a turbine is actually up and running
Yes.
near me, and I have that experience of stress or what was the other one? Sleep disturbance?
Yeah, it's stress or flicker or noise or even anything, sleep disturbance, whatever would.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot to consider there. I mean, first of all, is the turbine within behaving correctly? I mean, I think that a reasonable thing to do that. If it's louder than you're normally used to, is there something going on? And there's literally a free app on your phone that you can check that nowadays. You don't have to be a fancy $5,000 card-carrying physician to have a meter, $5,000 meter. I don't mean that. The sound meter, the fancy ones, are thousands of dollars. You don't need that anymore. You have a phone. Okay, so the first thing is the turbine behaving correctly, because if it isn't, that's something that the company needs to address. And I assume you'll have some sort of mechanism to reach out to the company for assistance with that. The second thing is, let's just take kind of one at a time. If you have a sleep disorder, there's an awful long list of things that cause sleep disorders, and I would say you address it with your doctor, because turbines are not known at the levels that we're talking about to cause sleep problems. So if I toss and turn and I hear the turbine, maybe I have insomnia, or if I'm waking up in the middle of the night, maybe it's time to think about whether I have sleep apnea or circadian rhythm problems or so forth. So I think opening up the aperture to the possibility that the turbine itself is not necessarily the problem, assuming that it's behaving as you've got set in your reasonable regulation. And I think that that's true for stress and so forth. I would only also add that if you are, like I am sometimes, the guy that talks on Google and just throws something in there to see, and you're going to see a long list of very scary things related to wind turbines, and it's going to be a huge misinformation, fear-mongering campaign. And I think it's tempting to look, and it's easy to get sucked down the vortex of misinformation, which can cause a lot of stress and overemphasis on problem. And it's I get to believe that the humming of this computer fan is going to cause cardiovascular disease, believe me, I'm gonna start noticing it, and it's gonna bug me. And on the other hand, if I think that that's cooling my computer to prevent it from malfunctioning, and that means I can sit here with folks like you and talk about information for hours without worrying about it, it's gonna set me at ease. And so I think it's really a matter of, that's why we're here today, that's why I'm here, is to try to put your mind at ease for the health effects of turbines at the level of regulation that we're talking about, for the kinds of turbines that you and I were here.
Okay, Chief, does the state have any particular wind turbine regulations, emergency response plans, et cetera, that you have to follow? Did you guys have to make it up in Gratiot County?
Okay.
And in the course of doing that, you said earlier that there was somebody that you had a health call, but, but have you had any actual emergency responses to something, you know, a safety problem with the turbine, a fire, anything like that? So one, is there particular trainings that you had to do or standards? And then have you ever had to respond to anything?
To this point, I've never seen anything in the state regulations or any, boilerplate, SOPs or SOGs for response to wind turbines. We've kind of developed our own in the county, working, Chairman of Gratiot County Fire Chiefs Association, have been since 1999. So when they first came in, we worked as a group as fire chiefs as to how this is gonna affect us, and we had those same concerns everybody else did, horror stories of people getting caught up there, and we stand there and watch because we can't do anything, and nobody else is trained, and our expertise as far as tech rescue and that kind of stuff through the Mavis is Station 5 or Station 7 on Lansing, so they can have a front team up here using the number 2 state police helicopter if it's available. 2 guys and a bunch of gear can get in there with a pilot and another troop and head up this way. They can be here in 20 minutes under most circumstances, and at least get a rescue started if that's what it was. But we didn't know all that stuff to start with, so we kind of invented our own wheel, so to speak. And it's really pretty simple, like I said earlier, compared to the other types of commercial businesses and industries that we have protection for. So really, we haven't spent a lot of time on it because it's not big. It's one of those things you train a lot on those things that you do a lot. You don't train a lot on those things that hardly ever happen because chance of them happen are one and done. So.
Okay, Clyde. Have wind turbines had an impact on farm operations in your county that you know of? And have your neighbors, what sort of experience would you say your neighbors have had? If more of your neighbors were here, what would they say? Well, let's first with it, has it had any impact on farming or any farm operations that you know?
A 2 million pound crane kind of compacts the ground a little bit, so we're still working on getting that broke up. They came through after the construction and did some detailing, but that's, if you look around the turbine site, they dug up a lot of subsoil, so it's going to take a few years to get the crops back to what they were before, but we're compensated adequately for it. I was paid more for my alfalfa than I have ever made by harvesting it. And by and large, there's a few people, well, they're not farmers, they're city folks that's moved to the farm, essentially. They don't like the flashing lights, and basically that's the big thing, when you look out and see 136 flashing lights, some people take offense to that. But other than that, most of the farmers in Isabella Township, where I'm at, they kind of welcomed it because it was another source of income that they weren't getting before. It's guaranteed for 25 years.
And I am aware, this I do know, that newer generation set wind turbines aren't gonna have the flashing lights because they use the radar technology. When the lights come on, the plane comes within it, so I know that flashing light syndrome is gonna go away. As a, Dr. Ken and or Dr. What was the noise limit of the Canvas study? And I thought it was up like 46 dBs is what they studied at. What is a safe distance from a home? What is a safe distance to site a wind turbine? And I don't know if Ken and or Doctor, you could, I mean, that's a very broad question. What is quote safe distance? At least from sound, I guess, or potential health effects.
Let me just quickly go back to the previous question, which is that the 46 decibels in the Health Canada study is the long-term average sound level. So the short-term maximum would be 1 hour IQ, the equivalent would be higher, like more like 50 decibels. And then the safe distance, I don't, as a noise control engineer, I look at, maybe say sound level, because, you could have a really loud, wind turbine and the safe distance would have to be, or preferable distance would have to be further. A quieter, turbine or fewer turbines, the setback would be smaller with respect to normal.
Okay, so it's not so much the distance, or it's the ratio between the noise and then the distance. So if the turbine were to be louder, it would obviously need to be farther. Okay. I don't know, Doctor.
Yeah, I mean, so, I'm not an engineer, so I would leave this section mostly to them, but I will say a couple things. One is, however high that tower is, you obviously don't want to be within the incredibly rare possibility of collapse. So you're never within, if a turbine is 300 feet or 500 feet, you're never within that ever. And if you stick with the sound level, then like me, I have the advantage, and you have the advantage of saying, I don't know what kind of turbine, it may be big, it may be small, it may be this brand or that brand. I need to have a sound level, let's say 46 dB at my house. You figure out the distance, because it's going to be substantially further away than it needs to be for anything, and then you know that you're within your sort of reasonable health range. Now, one other thing I want to add is the chief is correct. There are fairly sensational videos that you could find out there, and albeit incredibly rare, that things catch fire or have what's called icicles form and kind of flick off the blade. There's some 60,000 turbines spinning right now in the United States and happened for years, and that's been growing. I'm not aware of a single instance, not one, in which a human has been injured by ice throw, blade throw, that kind of thing. So, if you talk about it being a rare event, I'd love to hear of every case. I would want to hear about all of those cases that I'm not aware of there being even a single one. So there have been instances of people who are doing the construction and have injuries. That's a separate issue, not relevant for this crowd. And that's a serious issue too, from a development point of view for the company. But for the consumer, the person who's got these on their property, you're just not going to run into that as a health issue for you, which is why we included it on the slide.
Okay, we're technically past our time, but I'm going to try and squeeze in a few more questions. Chief, just to kind of follow up on that, you have an awareness. Again, most of the wind turbines in Michigan are concentrated in the thumb and in Gratiot, Isabella, and so forth. And have you spoken with other fire chiefs and safety folks that have had incidents? I mean, what are those like?
We haven't seen those incidents in Gratiot County to this point. We were in some initial discussions with the wind turbine companies, but their environmental health and safety directors go over that particular topic quite thoroughly with us. They did originally. Their instance of that is the same as yours. They've never had anybody killed. They have had some equipment damaged in the past, where they might have had a pickup truck parked and one of their guys is up in there working. So they've also early on developed their standard operating guidelines. If they're icing, even their guys aren't going to go in there and do any work on them until that weather changes or the ice comes off it, so they aren't actively working in or around them themselves in icy conditions. And quite often, the clutches and all the electronics that are built in there, when they start building up a certain amount of ice, just like an airplane propeller, as a licensed pilot, you've got instruments that will tell you that those things are happening. And so quite often, those early ones had the ability through the computer system and put all tight through to be able to shut that turbine off, so it's not laying in that ice until conditions change.
Okay. I have a couple of full disclosure questions. Ken or Dr. Ellen Hogan, do you have wind turbines on your personal property? I assume I think I know the answer.
No,
Right, yeah. No, nor do I. I have solar panels, but I don't have wind turbines. Then, there's a question here about a lawsuit with the family that was mentioned earlier. You know, I don't know what that would have to do with whatever, but
I was brought in to do the independent medical evaluation of them. I have no idea what happened with the lawsuit. I did a history exam of the gentleman and his spouse and provided that information to the lawsuit. I had heard that they had settled. I don't know what came of it. No one informed me of that. I don't ask.
okay, another full disclosure.
Michigan, though, you could ask, you can find out.
Yeah, okay. Have you been a spokesperson or consultant for Apex?
Yes.
Okay. What is the maximum decibels that a turbine produces? That's our last question.
Well, this is often a source of confusion, so it's a good question. The wind turbine manufacturers publish the sound emissions in terms of sound power level. And the sound power levels tend to range from about 104 to 109 decibels. That's not the same as sound pressure level. It's a completely different unit, but unfortunately they're both expressed in decibels. Typically, roughly the hub height plus half the rotor diameter away, you tend to be around 55 decibels at that close distance. That's sort of that range, roughly. But it's important not to get confused between sound power, which those numbers are in the hundreds, and the low hundreds, and sound pressure level, because they're two different things.
Okay, so sound pressure level is the level we hear, and that's,
Yes, that's right. What we hear. And it's like a light bulb which has two ratings. One is watts, which is the energy it uses, and the other is lumens. So sound power is like watts, and the perception of is lumens. So the sound pressure is lumens, the sound power is watts.
okay. So how bright it is the same as how much we can hear it, and that's sound pressure. All right. Okay.
I have a question. A few of them.
Well, then did you write them down?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Then bring them up.
Well, I had a feeling you probably wanted to ask them, seeing how you're sorting through it.
I've asked all the questions I have up here,
Okay.
every one of them.
Doctor,
So
are
I'm
you
happy
aware
to
of
answer
the
yours.
survey by NASA in the early 80s?
Am I aware of a survey and?
Yeah, with turbines in the early 80s.
I'm not.
They established ultrasound causes symptoms including accelerated heart rate, increased respiratory fatigue, dizziness, vertigo, nausea, motion sickness, headaches. Some people are more affected than others. You gonna discredit NASA?
Did you say infrasound or ultrasound?
Infrasound,
What's that?
Infrasound.
He's saying infrasound.
going through the ground. It also affects the knee.
The what?
The knee.
The need.
Yeah.
Tell me what you mean
Special
by that.
needs.
Are you saying that as a fact or a question?
Well, this is NASA research.
There's NASA research on the need.
No, turbines.
Okay, so let's just go slow through this for a second. So there's a NASA study, a survey,
In the 80s. No, a study, not a survey.
study this in, okay.
Yeah,
And what is the study? Tell me about it.
It causes symptoms including increased heart rate, respiratory fatigue, dizziness, vertigo, nauseous, motion sickness, headaches. Some people are more affected than others.
I don't know how to say this without losing credibility, but if there was a study by NASA 45 years ago, that was a scientifically sound study that demonstrated those things, I assure you that it wouldn't be buried in this conversation.
It's not buried. Research based.
Well, you're welcome to show it to me, and I will follow up with every one of these, but I guarantee you that it is not what you're saying.
You know, Canada did a lot of research too. And they
Okay.
come with the same conclusion.
Canada,
So,
the country, or what do you mean Canada?
Canada, yes, a lot of doctors.
All of the panelists have offered to stay and talk with anybody and everybody
Right,
individually.
adverse health effects of industrial wind turbines. Roy D. Jeffries. There's a few other ones.
Right.
And they said the same thing. Do you feel turbines cause people to lose sleep?
I do not.
You don't.
I
Well, this
think,
study shows it does.
sir, I think you have to decide whether you're listening to the things that I've been saying. Number one, I've been saying cited reasonable.
Well, that's your opinion. These are research based. There's 38 doctors involved in this.
Okay, this,
You gotta
look,
say all
you know,
38
you're
are
making-
lying.
hold it, I'm in charge now.
I'm asking him a question.
And you're welcome to ask me all the
All right,
questions you
you
want,
say all
but
38 doctors are
what I need to do is I need to thank everybody and, terminate the official program, so everybody is free to come and ask any one of these gentlemen, any questions they
We
want.
started in
So,
09,
no, excuse me, sir,
07,
hold on,
2010,
hold on,
2012,
just a second.
lots of research right here.
All right, remember when I said I was a scoutmaster? I expected my young boys to act with courtesy, trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly. If you can't,
The World
I'll
Health
treat-
Organization
no,
says
sir,
it affects
I'm
you,
telling you right now.
the elderly.
If you
and people with health
can't
issues.
let me handle the rest of this program and invite people, I have a gentleman in a brown suit back there who can help you out the door.
You wanna help me out the door?
No, I don't. I want you to come up and ask your questions, but I want them to be able to ask their
This
questions
is a fine
too.
example.
So, no,
where the
alright,
truth
so
doesn't
event
like
is
the
over.
question.
Sorry
Well,
for
why
one
does
person
life
who
become-
can't follow the rules like the rest of you. I thank you for following the rules. And if you're still welcome to come up and talk to the panelists, as are you, sir. Welcome to come and talk to the panelists.
It's a biased
So,
panel. Not paid for by
so,
anybody.
thank you very much for coming.
Any not paid for by anybody. You guys all are. Oh, don't worry about it. Shame on you. Like I said, lies don't like to hear the truth, that's why I make questions.